So the open beta for Call of Duty Black Ops 6's multiplayer ran over this past weekend, and I got a chance to mess around with it a bit. And to put it simply, I'm not impressed. There's nothing about Call of Duty Black Ops 6's multiplayer that actually impressed me. Mechanically, it was more or less what we've seen from the past several Call of Duty games, both in terms of gunplay, the gunsmith mode, the actual modes on display, etc. Only the big gimmick they threw together for this one is a movement overhaul, where they act like you're supposed to be able to now move like an action movie hero or something like that, because they've tried to make the movement smoother and faster. They have some automation included for things like mantling over objects, and they also have omnidirectional sprinting, sliding, and diving. Yeah, Treyarch seems to have gotten it in their head that they want Black Ops 6 to be what people have been referring to as a movement shooter, which is a thoroughly stupid way of trying to describe a first-person shooter, but the idea is that it's all about fast and advanced movement, which is something that Call of Duty has dipped its toes in on occasion, but has never really been truly known for, although there is a rather small subset of the Call of Duty fan base that gets a lot of attention online because they upload these clips of them just flopping all over the damn place like a fish, effectively, where they're just constantly slide canceling, diving, jumping, whatever, in order to try to get an advantage on other players. And the simple fact of the matter is that while that might look cool to some people in an edited online video, in practice, most of the time you're not actually getting any kind of advantage by doing those sorts of things. Sure, it might be helpful occasionally to dive or slide around a corner or into cover because you're in the middle of a firefight, and varying up your movement might be enough to throw their aim off just enough to be able to survive the encounter. But Call of Duty's gameplay in general, and its map design in particular, aren't really designed to take full advantage of movement systems like that. So the instances where being able to sprint in any direction, or slide or dive all over the place, are going to actually make a significant difference are quite minimal. What it will do, however, is contribute to even more of the ADHD, overly caffeinated crowd constantly spazzing all over the place as they try to look cool for their clip compilations, while pretty much everybody else is just playing the game normally, occasionally diving or sliding if they feel like they need to escape damage or whatever, and generally being many times more effective than the ones who are constantly acting like they need to MLG it up. It was actually legitimately silly going into this thing, because when I started it up, it was like, hey, you got this new movement system, we recommend you play through the tutorial for that first so you get an idea how that feels. So I did that, and immediately I realized that the movement in Black Ops 6 feels very weird compared to previous Call of Duty games. It's very floaty. You feel more like you're just kind of gliding all over the place instead of actually sprinting, sliding, or diving, and it's just an odd feeling. And when you combine that with what the game is kind of expecting you to do, which is just slide, cancel, dive all over the place, etc., it becomes very clear that the game wasn't really designed around the movement system, but rather the movement system was shoehorned into the game at some point because presumably they saw a bunch of these clips of people spazzing out with the slide canceling and such online and thought, wow, that's what people really want from Call of Duty, I guess we better include that in our game. Meanwhile, the vast majority of the Call of Duty player base looks at those kinds of clips and thinks, wow, those people need to lay off the energy drinks. I mean, don't get me wrong, Call of Duty is a fast-paced first-person shooter, and there's nothing wrong with trying to encourage fast-paced gameplay, but the only thing the movement overhaul in Black Ops 6 really manages to accomplish is make it feel really floaty and weird, where if you actually try to engage with these new movement mechanics, it feels like you're just kind of flopping around all over the place and don't actually have a huge amount of control over where you're moving. And more importantly, it contributes to presumably the target audience for this game, people in their 30s and 40s who actually have nostalgia for the 90s, being pushed away because the movement being all floaty and weird and requiring a lot of slide canceling and such to actually have any real control over makes them feel like they're getting too old for this shit. And funnily enough, that was actually my prevailing thought throughout most of my time with this open beta. I'm no stranger to fast-paced first-person shooters or even advanced movement systems, but the specific way it is implemented in Black Ops 6, with how floaty and frankly just kind of spazzy it feels, made me constantly think to myself, man, I am just too old for this shit. And even when I did get more or less used to the mechanics, it still just didn't feel right, and it made the entire gameplay experience of the beta suffer. And the rest of what the beta had to offer didn't really compensate for that. I mean, the Create a Class and Gunsmith system are more or less what we've seen from the past several games in the series, but they've brought back wild cards, which is kind of a Black Ops feature at this point, and they introduced something they called specializations, where each of the different perks you can choose has a category that is associated with it. So in practice it's red, blue, and green, but there's Enforcer, which is the red one, Recon, which is the blue one, and Strategist, which is the green one. And if all three of your perks are in the same category, then you unlock additional specialization bonuses. So if you have all three Enforcer perks, then you get a temporary buff to your movement speed and health regeneration whenever you take out an enemy. The Strategist specialization gives you score bonuses for completing objectives and destroying enemy gadgets and streaks and such. And in a short distance around you, you can also see enemy gadgets and such highlighted even through walls, and you can deploy your own equipment and field upgrades faster. And then the one I used all the time was Recon, because it is hilariously overpowered to the point where if you use it, people will probably think you're cheating. Why? Well, whenever you're running around and getting in firefights, you'll see this big yellow indicator pop up on your HUD in the direction that an enemy is, so you can immediately turn to wherever that is and see an enemy, probably before they even see you. You also don't leave any death skulls whenever you take out an enemy, and that's the indicator on the minimap and such. And whenever you respawn, you can see enemies through walls for a short time after the respawn. It is just downright ridiculous, and it is so much better than the other bonuses you get for Enforcer and Strategist that nobody in their right mind would go for anything but Recon. I mean, it's basically the game giving you wall hacks, or as they call it these days, ESP cheats. It is utterly absurd. I have no idea why Treyarch thought this was a good idea to implement, but apparently they did. Honestly, part of me wants to say that it's them attempting to compensate for how absolutely terrible the spawns are, because that's just something that's plagued the Call of Duty series for a long time, and it's no exception here either, where you'll spawn in pretty much right on top of an enemy and they'll just dome you immediately. As well as the fact that they have the footstep sounds being as incredibly quiet as they are, meaning that even if somebody is sprinting right next to you, you can't hear them. Now granted, before the beta, I was messing around an awful lot with Hunt Showdown, and that has some of the best sound design in all of first-person shooters right now, so maybe it was just that I'd gotten used to sound design actually being good and being able to tell where enemies are just based on sound alone, but you would think, with as long as Call of Duty has been around, with as many studios as have worked on it, and with as many resources as they have to throw at these games, they would have figured out the god-awful spawns by now, and also would have figured out the audio issues by now so you can actually hear where enemies are coming from, but apparently not. Oh, and you would think that after as many Call of Duty games as they've made, Treyarch would actually know how to design maps by now, but apparently they still don't know how to do that either, because the maps in this beta were absolute garbage. As is typical for Treyarch, they are utterly obsessed with every single map being 3-lane garbage, but then there's the Babylon map, which is one of the worst maps I've ever had the misfortune of even attempting to play in a Call of Duty game, and I have no idea what the hell is supposed to go on in there. It's just a completely chaotic clusterfuck. But of course, if the map voting system is any indication, the chaotic clusterfuck that is Babylon is exactly what the modern Call of Duty audience wants, so I guess yet more evidence of me getting too old for this. Apparently, I am just insane for wanting maps that aren't just 3-lane garbage and aren't completely chaotic messes. You know, stuff that actually has a decent flow to it and is actually memorable instead of being yet another 3-lane garbage map or yet another cramped, chaotic clusterfuck map. But obviously, that's just too much to ask these days, so bring on the slop! Anyway, once you move past the map designs, the movement system, and the specialization system, and you get into the rest of the gameplay, honestly, there's just not really much to talk about here. If you've played a Call of Duty game in the past several years, you've played Black Ops 6. At least in terms of gunplay, in terms of the way the class setup works, it's all very familiar. It works fine. It's not terrible. It's not great. It's just okay. And none of the modes that I had access to were anything all that special either. I mean, you had your basic TDM, domination, hardpoint, that kind of thing. You also had the mode that you're calling Kill Order in this, which is just bounty from previous games. It's been a while since bounty has been in the series, but they brought it back for Black Ops 6. And it's pretty straightforward. It's just your basic TDM, except one player on each team is designated as the VIP. And while you're the VIP, you generate more points for your team, so you want to stay alive as long as possible. And you also want to take down the other team's VIP as soon as possible so that you can get more points than them. They did put a slight Warzone-y twist on it, where the VIP has armor plates, so you have to break their armor before you can actually damage their health. And they can replenish their armor plates once, so if they manage to survive a gunfight and get their armor taken down, they can just put in a couple more plates. And instead of just going down when their health bottoms out, they actually go into last stand mode, so they whip out a pistol and can open fire, and they can actually be revived by their teammates, at least if their teammates are able to get to them in time. And while it is nice to see them putting at least a slightly different spin on the mode compared to how it was previously in the series, it's not really enough to make a significant difference. It's pretty basic, and if you've played this mode in previous Call of Duty games where it was called Bounty, it's all going to be very familiar to you. And when you bring all that together, you end up with something that I feel like is just going to be a repeat of Black Ops Cold War, at least in terms of how it all works out. Where the single-player campaign is the real highlight of the experience, and the rest of the game just isn't really all that great. Obviously, the beta is a limited selection of content, and the game's not finished yet, so there were definitely a few performance issues here and there. There were a few glitches here and there. Nothing all that concerning, and generally speaking, the game ran very well, though to be fair, I am running a quite beefy computer. It's a Ryzen 9 5900X, 64 gigs of RAM, and an RTX 3080 12GB model, so a game like this that's still releasing on PS4 and Xbox One simultaneously with Xbox Series X and S, PlayStation 5, and PC should run well. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens when this game launches in October, but there's not much time left for them to make any real significant changes, and all of the content that's going to be in the game at launch is pretty much locked in already, so I don't think they're going to make any significant alterations to maps or modes or anything like that. And given how the movement system felt, and the just boneheaded decision that is the specialization system, especially with regards to the recon specialization, I can very easily see this game being very divisive on its multiplayer front. I know I certainly didn't like my time with the beta, and maybe that'll change whenever I do end up getting a copy of the full game and getting more time with the multiplayer to really get used to those controls and such. But now that I've messed around with the open beta, I can't really say I'm looking forward to that. Now, the single-player campaign's another story entirely. I am actually looking forward to that, but I'm definitely not looking forward to the zombies mode at all. I have absolutely no interest in it whatsoever. I have absolutely no interest whatsoever in the changes that it might make to Warzone, and even if the general gameplay mechanics are improved by the time I get around to messing with it, and I actually end up turning around completely on the multiplayer gameplay and end up enjoying it, I know they're just going to absolutely destroy any kind of vibe the game is going for with the cosmetics. I mean, hell, even in the open beta, they are already destroying the vibe by having those zombie-style characters in the multiplayer for people who had already pre-ordered the game and such. And having all these ridiculously gaudy, neon-colored, with moving texture weapon skins and such like that, and the inevitable movie, celebrity, whatever crossovers they're going to have in multiplayer, where you're going to start, I don't know, having friggin' Nicki Minaj running around on the battlefield in this one too. I have no idea what they're going to do with this one. But anyway, point is that I know they're going to absolutely destroy the game's vibes with the microtransactions and cosmetics they're going to introduce into the game later on. I know it's going to be an absolutely miserable grind as far as Battle Pass stuff goes, because why would anybody want to bother with the Battle Pass when you don't even get most of it unless you pay extra? Although I guess there is the slight benefit, if you can even call it a benefit at all, of this game being day one on Game Pass, so you don't technically have to pay the $70 US if you have a Game Pass subscription. But then, of course, there's a subscription service problem, and if you get any of the microtransactions while you have it on Game Pass but haven't bought the game, then if your subscription lapses at any point, then you lose access to any of the stuff you had in the game, and you're not able to play it anymore until either you re-up your subscription or you just buy the game outright. And look, Microsoft has been pushing the Game Pass subscriptions for a while, and they have been really trying to go all in on that, and I really don't think it's going to work out for them in the long run. So I guess we'll see what happens on that, but as far as this open beta goes, it certainly does not instill confidence in the final product. Let's put it that way. Thank you all very much for watching. If you like my videos, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon. If you can't afford to or don't want to, that's perfectly fine, I understand, but the option's there if you're interested, and every bit really helps out. You'd be amazed how even $1 a month can help out. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you all in later videos.